What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Kevin Svenson, and today is March 20th. It is Thursday, coming up into the second half of the week, and Bitcoin is playing out interesting price action where we've seen some signs that there may be a bottom forming, a bounce coming, but we're also not totally out of the woods just yet. One thing that I find interesting is that the fear and greed index hit one of the lowest levels we've seen for, years now. At the end of February, going into March, we hit a 10 on the fear and greed index, which historically, if you look, that is extremely low. So we've seen sentiment get a complete reset. So that is significant. It probably means we've reached a climax in fear, which means that even if we are going to go lower at some point, probably not very much at all. In fact, we're probably forming a bottom in this range. Now, looking at Bitcoin on the weekly chart, you can see Bitcoin is still maintaining the exponential trend. We are still maintaining it. We had a slight test below the parabolic trend line, though we closed above it on the weekly. You go to your line chart, you can see we never closed below the parabolic trend line. And if you're looking at the weekly RSI, Bitcoin has retested the weekly RSI level in which we found all of our major supports since 2023. Whenever we formed a parabolic low, we tested about 44 to 45 on the weekly RSI. We did it again over here in 2024, and we've done it once again here in 2025. And this gives us reason to believe that the area that we're currently testing could be a significant zone for support. One of the things that I'm currently waiting for is the weekly MACD to begin showing signs that the bears are losing momentum. In all the areas where we tested the RSI before bouncing, we also had the MACD cross down, which we currently have it cross down, and eventually the MACD created a low and started to show that the bears were losing momentum. Right, getting higher histogram values. We are still in a position of getting lower histogram values. So the MACD currently on this week is showing that the bears still have the momentum. So that is a sort of a counter indicator to the idea of this being a support. We don't have full confirmation, or we don't have any confirmation yet that the weekly MACD has found a low point, but that is what I'm going to be looking for next week. If Bitcoin is able to close this weekly green and next week we open up with a higher histogram value in this range, that would be a signal that maybe we have found our low for this region. We may look to at least stabilize, right? Because the MACD is showing momentum. It's more so gauging momentum, not necessarily the direction of the market. We hit a peak on the MACD. It started coming down. Did that mean that we were going down in price at that time? No, it actually just meant that we were going sideways. We actually ended up hitting a new all-time high after the MACD showed that the bulls lost momentum. So when the MACD curls over, the price goes sideways, similar to this zone here, where when the MACD comes down and begins to curl upward, the bears lose that downside momentum and we go sideways and eventually recover, right? And so as the MACD begins to print, most likely in the next few weeks to the upside, I think what's going to happen is we're going to find ourselves bouncing to the upside, maybe entering the 90K range, and then chopping, the bears losing momentum, which equals sideways price action most often. And then later, a recovery back up and out. I think that this cycle's not over yet. I think the fear that we've seen recently was a good indicator that the cycle's really not over. We haven't seen much euphoria in the market. So all this fear is making me more confident that we're finding a low point, that we're forming a bottom of some kind. Whether Bitcoin hit its low or maybe it tests a slightly lower low, I think we're ultimately going to be forming a bottom in this region. In the event that Bitcoin bounces up and then pulls back again to test a slightly lower low, what we would probably see is it testing along that downward sloping support line. You can see here we have those downward sloping supports. There is a possibility that at some point the market does a final flush before actually recovering. I mean, Bitcoin plays out that type of wacky price action all the time, right? Kind of like August over here. This is something that I'm not going to discount. I'm not going to say it's not possible. Of course it's possible, right? If we were to play out kind of like a final flush into a slightly lower low, this scenario wouldn't surprise me, right? Testing down to the low 70s one more time, first going into the 90,000 range first, and then flushing before a full recovery. It could get a little wacky before we actually get our recovery, but if the MACD on the weekly is showing that the bears are losing momentum and we're holding that RSI support on the weekly, well, I'm going to be looking for general sideways price action. Could be higher highs, lower lows, but ultimately sideways before a recovery back to new all-time highs. Yes, I'll say it. I guess I'll be the only one to say it, that I'm still expecting new all-time highs in this cycle. right? Nothing's changed from that perspective. The one thing that we talked about in the last video was that there's a strong possibility that the parabolic trend line can break. Because we're so close to it, Bitcoin would pretty much just have to go up in a straight line in order to maintain it. So it's unlikely that will happen. In my opinion, it's more likely that we would kind of go sideways and chop a little bit and form a larger trend, sort of how what we did in 2024 when Bitcoin broke the parabolic trend line at the time. It was sitting like this. We broke down. If you remember that video, I had like a funny intro for this. And we sort of chopped and then recovered later. And I'm looking for something similar here as being more likely, at least right now, it seems more likely that we're looking for, rebounds, nice rebounds in the 90K range, maybe chop back down, go sideways, and then push for a new all-time high going into the second half of this year. So that's at least currently my expectation, my outlook for Bitcoin. In the meantime, in the shorter term, you could say Bitcoin currently has a downward sloping resistance line that you could be looking at as a potential target on a bounce. If we continue up, you may be looking at something like 91,000 as a test of this downward sloping resistance. And on the daily chart, the daily RSI, you can see we're rejecting the 50 level. We do have that those lower lows with higher lows on the daily RSI, which is giving us bullish divergence. And it could play out with a break above 51 to 52 here on the RSI and push us to the upper end of the RSI to retest something like 91 or maybe even a little higher before further consolidation and a recovery later on. I don't think it's going to be some sort of super quick recovery, but I do think that we're forming a low here and we're entering probably what's going to end up being some kind of an accumulation range before we're going up and out of here. When sentiment was at its worst, the prices were all the way down here and we bounced again when sentiment was at its worst point. Once there's optimism, I would get a little cautious in the short term for a retrace. And then once fear is high again, get optimistic, get greedy when others are fearful. And I think we're going to form a bottom in this range. But that's just my guess. That's just kind of how I see things playing out based on what I'm seeing on the indicators and the price action and the sentiment. So just want to quickly update you guys on this. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, smash a like, subscribe to this channel. I'll see you all in the next one.